All right. Some reason I got the audio in my earbuds here. Thanks, Drew, for the save, but I guess it's not coming through. So give me a comment there if you guys are getting it now. Okay, I'm back. I got it. All right. Sorry about that, guys. A little bit of a false start. I'll back this up. So the rumor going around this weekend is a potential fall election. What I was just saying a minute ago is that our intelligence officer, Tom Quiggan, is just running a little bit late here. I'm just waiting for him to join me on the stream, but I thought I'd whet your appetites with a little bit of background, show you what's going on out there right now in the information ecosystem. So what we're looking at here is the Toronto Sun. We got Lilly. Why Trudeau might be eyeing an early election this fall. I'm always a little bit suspicious of Brian Lilly personally. I think he's a little bit controlled opposition, perhaps. It says, striking at the Conservatives before their new leader gets settled is a strategy that has plenty of risk, no doubt, but also the possibility of great reward. Okay, and then further down in the article here, I've got this passage here highlighted. It says, the Conservatives are about to pick a new leader on September 10th, and therein lies Trudeau's opportunity. Striking at the Conservatives before their new leader gets settled. I don't think that's as much of an opportunity personally as it's being made out to be. I think once the Conservatives get a leader, just kind of based on who the candidates are right now, I mean, John Charest is a bit of a joke, obviously. But there are some other young leaders out there that look pretty promising and are attracting a lot of attention, especially at the town halls and the local communities where the grassroots are coming out to see them. So personally, I don't really think that's what's going on. I think the motivations lie elsewhere. So we also have this article here. This is another kind of in the same lines. It says, with Pierre Poilievre expected to win the leadership, Liberals and Conservatives speculating about a snap election this fall. And it says, if an election were to happen this fall, it would only benefit the Conservatives, not the Liberals, say pollsters Nick Nanos and Frank Graves. And I just wanted to, these guys are kind of agreeing with me, and they're kind of establishment guys. So I think the establishment, like I'm showing this now because I think this is a sign that the establishment is starting to understand that Trudeau has lost his shine. So I just kind of, in case you're not aware, this is Nick Nanos and Frank Graves. These are pollsters, basically social science guys that are really well known in Canada. So here we have Nick Nanos. Okay, that's Nanos Research. And I just wanted to show you this. At the beginning of his career, the firm conducted a controversial writing survey that predicted that Peter Milliken later become Speaker of the House of Commons in Canada, a relatively unknown Liberal federal candidate in the riding of Kingston, and the Islands would defeat senior Progressive Conservative Cabinet Minister Flora MacDonald in the 1988 Canadian federal election. Okay, so I'm just putting that out there because it looks like kind of a sign that he's a little bit of an insider and maybe has connections. I'm just saying he's establishment, that's all. And also here's Frank Graves. In April 2010, the president of the Conservative Party of Canada, John Walsh, filed a complaint with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, citing an interview with Lawrence Martin where Graves suggested that he had told the Liberal Party they should invoke a culture war against the Conservatives. Graves was providing polling services to the CBC at the time and later apologized for his incendiary comments. An investigation conducted by the CBC Ombudsman concluded that wherever Mr. Graves' private views, CBC journalists do not appear to have violated the CBC's journalistic standards and practices in dealing with him. Okay, so again, these guys are, you know, like everybody, partisan, and I just wanted to put that out there. And while I was reading that, Tom Quiggan jumped in on the line there. How you doing, Tom? All right. I'll give him a minute there to get his mic set up. Okay, so yeah, I just want to give some background on who these actors are here. They are political actors. They're insiders, pretty clearly connected. They've been in that Ottawa ecosystem for a very long time. You know, I'm kind of thinking that this is a sign that things are kind of turning at the highest levels or the deepest levels, I guess, in this case. And let's see how Tom's doing here. Hey, Tom, can you hear me? No, I don't think so. Okay. So now I just want to go back here and let's think about what's going on at the moment. Okay, we had the trucker protest in January. It was they called the Emergencies Act basically looking for a crime without having any evidence of a crime resulting from any investigation. Because they wanted to oppress their citizens. So they figured they'd go in there and find their excuse, but then when they didn't get any, now they have to scramble. So I've been talking about false flags a lot and how it looks like there are actors out there who might be trying to bait people into one location, maybe incite some kind of violence, put their own agitators in there. And once you get a backlash, you come in, crack down on everybody, paint the whole movement as violent, and come after us all. Tom, I'm showing that your mic is not connected, buddy. So the thing is, they have these committees underway. They're investigating what happened when it came to calling the Emergencies Act. They've lied to cover their tracks the whole way, and that much is becoming clear to everybody at this point. Both or all of the participating police organizations have come forward and said that they didn't ask for the Emergencies Act and they didn't recommend it. So we're still left to find out who it is that made this decision. This is, people have even called this Canada's Tiananmen Square. And they've been doing their best to avoid accountability or even answer any questions into the matter up until now. And I just wanted to go back to a little something that I remember from just prior to the previous election. So here we have the National Post. And this is from June 23rd, 2021. It says, fired Winnipeg lab scientist listed as a co-inventor of 2 Chinese government patents. The Federal Public Servants Inventions Act says a government employee cannot file a patent outside the country without the minister's permission. So here we have this Chinese woman who she's a citizen of China, and it says, the high-profile scientist who was fired from Canada's top infectious disease lab collaborated with Chinese government scientists on inventions registered in Beijing but closely related to her federal job, intellectual property documents indicate. So this is somebody who was engaged in some of this bioengineering. Okay, she's working within the Chinese state and has a couple of patents with her name on them already. And those are Chinese state patents. And she somehow managed to get a security clearance and get into this level 4 Winnipeg lab. Tom, how you doing? You hear me over there? No, he's still, I think your mic's working now. So it says here, Key was a long-time federal civil servant with the patents were registered in 2017 and 2019 for innovations related to the Ebola and Marburg viruses, key focuses of her work at Winnipeg's National Microbiology Laboratory. So, the Chinese government got somebody into one of our level 4 microbiology labs. I think it's our only one there in Winnipeg. And they were working on Ebola and Marburg viruses. Here we... The implication here is that what else did they take? Okay, if they're working with Ebola, are we giving the Chinese government the Ebola virus? And since they're very open about the fact that they want to be number 1 in bioweapons technology, I'd say that that's a pretty concerning little piece of data that we have here. That we have this person working within our establishment. So Key's ouster from the lab remains cloaked in mystery and has been the subject of an ongoing debate in Parliament as opposition parties try, largely in vain, to obtain information on why she and her husband, Keating Sheng, and other scientists at the lab were let go. You're good, Tom. I hear you, Tom. Tom doesn't hear me. Okay. Key had extensive dealings with China and Chinese scientists in recent years, including repeated trips to the Wuhan Institute of Virology at Level 4 disease lab like Winnipeg's. So, yeah, that's the, well, we know which lab that is, right? That's the one the coronavirus came out of. That's the coronavirus that has the sequence that was patented by Moderna, I think, in 2018. And they said there's something like a 1 in 10 trillion chances that it arose naturally. And we have one of their scientists from that lab, that level 4 biosecurity lab, working in our level 4 biosecurity lab, and they're getting escorted out. Now, what I can see here is, let's see now, as I'm reading here, like it seems like they're kind of glossing over some of the details. And we have here another article that does the same. This is what I'm kind of seeing the mainstream media do, is over time, they start to gloss over some of the more damning details, right? So if we go back a little bit earlier, they're talking about how they were fired. And then if we continue all the way back, this is to February 6, 2021, 2 Canadian government scientists escorted from the National Microbiology Laboratory amidst an RCMP investigation and internal review have been let go from the Public Health Agency of Canada, CBC News has learned. It says, quote, the 2 scientists are no longer employed by the Public Health Agency of Canada as of January 20th, 2021, close quote. Eric Morissette, Chief of Media Relations for FAC, confirmed in an email late Friday. Okay, so the thing is that the later we go in time, the less emphasis is put on the fact that they were under investigation by the RCMP and that this was a security breach. It's more like they're toward the end here, it's more like they're getting fired. And what happened, what I saw happen anyway, the last time around when they called the election, nobody could understand after they promised that nobody would call an election during the pandemic. They went ahead and called one anyway, and when everybody was kind of scrambling for a reason, I saw a couple of independent so-called media reports that were talking about this. So the thing is that once they stand up one of these committees and start looking into the matter, and they tried to compel them to start releasing documents about this, the Prime Minister refused. And the Speaker of the House asserted that it was the House that in fact had supremacy and not the Prime Minister. So, or Parliament has supremacy. So, Tom, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. I don't know why it wouldn't hook up, so I just re-signed in twice, and now we're working.
Okay, all right. Glad to have you. Sorry for your troubles. I was just kind of whetting everybody's appetite with a little bit of background here. So far, I kind of covered a little bit about a potential advantage conferred by the fact that the Conservatives are without a leader at the moment. So, before anybody gets settled, they might be vulnerable. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but I don't think that's what's really motivating them. I'm kind of seeing some parallels with the last election, namely that when you call an election, all those committees into their corruption. Last time it was the Winnipeg lab, or the Chinese, what appear to be spies, were escorted out by the RCMP, and they have papers with their names on them published for patents and working in the Wuhan lab. And so they called the election to get rid of these committees and kind of stall whatever investigations were ongoing into what really happened here. And now we have another situation where we had the Emergencies Act called last February, and these committees are really starting to close in on the truth here. Like there are so many lies that have been ruled out with regard to violence, weapons, all the way down to stealing food from the homeless. And so they're kind of backed into a corner. And one good way to kind of shut it all down, at least for the time being, would be to call an election and and all of these committees would basically be, I guess, disconstituted, at least for the time being. And by the time they got reconstituted after an election, they would probably be different people, and it would take them a while to spin up again, and so on and so forth. So, but that's my read of it anyway. And I was wondering what you were able to turn up.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things going on, Jeff, and clearly that's one of them. The committee that is investigating, as required by law, the process leading up to the Emergencies Act is proving to be a rather gross embarrassment for the government. And various ministers, such as the Public Safety Minister and the Justice Minister, are repeatedly being pointed out as having lied to the public on a number of significant issues. Everything, as you note, from the charges of attempted rape to the arson to the guns in the truck to all that sort of stuff. The narratives are all falling apart. So that's a major embarrassment for them, because, of course, that all leads back to PMO at the end of the day. So that's kind of a problem. You mentioned the idea, too, the Conservatives are in an interesting position on September 10th in the evening. If everything goes well and they're magic machines that count votes automatically with computers, if they work correctly, we're supposed to get an outcome. And so on the morning of September 11th, hopefully we'll know who the leader of the new Conservative Party is. If it does turn out to be Pierre Poilievre, I think the Liberals are going to jump on this with both feet. He's going to be a white supremacist. He's going to be Donald Trump North. He is going to be a populist. He is going to be Islamophobic. He's going to be homophobic. He's going to be someone who hates the Bank of Canada, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to roll out a ton of stuff against him. And I think it works in the favor of the Liberals to have the campaign sooner rather than later, because they can dump everything on Pierre, but it would take him like weeks or months to kind of get up and get going and establish his own persona in front of the Canadian people. So that's one thing. And then, of course, in the background, we've got the narrative fail. The economic narrative, where, the Liberals portray themselves as, effective maintainers of the economy. Of course, that's falling through the floor. The vaccine narrative is failing badly, as we see, the increase in hospitalizations tends to be people who are triple vaccinated, not people who weren't vaccinated. So that's kind of an issue. And then the whole sort of social justice narrative, I think people are just getting tired of it. Not everybody in Canada is a racist. Not everybody is Islamophobic. Not everybody hates women, and not everybody hates natives, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that tool of suppression and division is actually starting to fail on the Liberals. So whenever I think about a problem like this, I think about what would happen to me if I was suddenly in charge of the problem. And it's a good way to think from an intelligence perspective, is to say, if you woke up tomorrow morning and you were the Liberals campaign manager, what would you tell them? And my advice to the Liberals would be, go hard, go fast, have the election as soon as possible, because right now you have a vague chance of getting a majority government. But the longer it goes with the vaccines, the economy, the Emergencies Act, and everything else, the more it wears away. So go fast, go hard, do it now. So when I discuss this with people, a lot of them say, Tom, you're crazy. There's no way Trudeau can win. Everybody hates him. It's falling apart. He'll get beaten. And I sort of say, well, okay, hang on just a second. What does Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party have to do in order to get a majority government? And the answer is they have to get between 23 and 25% of all registered voters to vote for them. And that, plus a combination, if the votes break correctly, then with 25% of registered voters voting for them, they could get a majority government. With 21, 22, 23%, they could get another minority government. So it speaks poorly of the Canadian electoral system to realize that 1 out of 4 voters could vote for Trudeau, and he winds up with a strong majority government. But nonetheless, that's where it's at. So the last election where Mr. Trudeau got his minority government, that was about 20.5 or 21% of all registered voters voted for him. So here in Canada, something like 18 or 20% of the turnout will be Liberal anyway, because there's a certain number of people will vote Liberal. Even if they run a dead skunk as Prime Minister, they'll vote Liberal. And same for the Conservatives. That's not being critical of Liberals. And same for the NDP. They'll get their 12, 14% no matter what. So the question has to then become, is there a path to power, as they say, for Mr. Trudeau? Is there something he could do? And I would say, yeah, he's doing it already. first off, he's out there campaigning already. So the campaign, I would argue, they're certainly starting it now. So if they need it later, it's already going. The second thing is dropping hints. So for instance, the $600 million handout to the press, which was used to, one could argue, effectively buy off the press, he's just announced he's going to extend that for another couple of years when it runs out the first time. So he's already told the press he's going to buy them out for another couple of years. And we've seen no real changes in cabinet. He's not shaking up the military, the RCMP. It's all sort of hold the course and all that kind of stuff. So here's what I would suggest if Trudeau wants a path to power. Here's what he's going to do. He's going to create a crisis this fall, which is already starting. They're already talking about increased hospitalizations, and we may need a mask mandate, and we may have to go back to, the mandates about you need to be double vaxxed to get on an airplane and all that kind of foolishness. And that's already ramping up. So you create a crisis, and then you sort of throw in the economic crisis, which is starting to occur anyway. And then you lay on top of that just a whole bunch of restrictions for, let's say, climate change. Everybody's in a panic over climate change. And Mr. Trudeau has just announced they're going to do they're attacking farmers as polluters. They're now referring to farmers as polluters, and they're going to do the fertilizer thing. We're going to cut the amount of fertilizer, which means cutting the amount of food, which means increasing the cost. So create a crisis with all that sort of stuff, and then portray yourself as the leader and say, wow, during the last crisis, we gave everybody CERB, we gave everybody money, we gave tax breaks. Well, this time we're going to do even more amazing stuff. We're going to give, universal basic income. Everybody gets a guaranteed income. We'll cancel all the student loans, more free stuff. So create a crisis, present yourself as the savior, and then flood the market with free stuff. And my argument would be that that could be sufficient to get 25% of all registered voters in Canada to vote for Mr. Trudeau in a potential October election. And that would be enough to get him into guaranteed power for the next 4 to 5 years from this fall. The flip side of this is if he doesn't do it, then he's got a coalition partner who's not the most trustworthy person in the world, which is to say NDP leader Mr. Jagmeet Singh. And as I mentioned, all the narratives are starting to run out. In other words, there's going to be an economic crisis. There's going to be a vaccine crisis. There's, I think, a sort of social crisis in the country that people are just getting tired of his crap. So, yeah, a lot of people are saying he's going to take a chance and he's going to have a run at a fall election. So we'll see. The indicators are there. It's just a matter of waiting to see where they go, Jeff.
Yeah, it's well, the crisis is what really kind of scares me because we're already looking at food shortages. We know what they're doing over there in the Netherlands, that they're banning fertilizer. They're not letting them produce as much food. That's why they're striking over there. And we've also seen on this podcast as well, we covered that Trudeau has plans to bring exactly those kind of policies in here. So we're looking at what potentially here. You got to be vaccinated to stand in the bread line. So where are we going with this? What is the long-term goal, I guess? What do you think?
I think there's, it was funny. It leaked out from the Liberals a couple of years ago, and no one was quite sure whether it was a serious statement from them or not. But one of the popular beliefs, and you can see it unfolding, and it helps you to understand Mr. Trudeau and what he does if you believe it. One of the popular beliefs is that in order to get another government, you create a situation where people need continuing government handouts. So in other words, the lower classes are already impoverished. They already depend on certain handouts, welfare, subsidized daycare, all that sort of stuff. But the middle class is a little more independent. They have enough money to get through the next couple of months. They've got a house, they've got a car, whatever. And a functioning, effective, well-educated middle class is the greatest obstacle to a dictatorship. So if you want to have effective long-term power in a sort of one-party democracy, the thing you have to do is crush the middle class. So a lot of people say, well, Trudeau's stupid. He's ineffective as a monetary manager. He doesn't pay attention to things. I would turn that around and say, well, it depends what his objective is. If his objective is a healthy, growing prosperous middle class, then yeah, he's not doing a great job. He's killing us. But if his other objective is to bring the middle class to heel, force them to become dependent on government handouts, tax breaks, and force them to submit to the government in order to keep their job, in order to allow them to travel, then one could make an argument Mr. Trudeau is actually doing a very good job if that is in fact his objective. So I think we'll see that into the fall. It's clear, as you point out, cost of food's going through the roof. Cost of gasoline here in Ottawa right now is like about $1.75 a liter, whatever it is. Price of eggs have more than doubled. Chicken has gone from like $8.80 a kilo up to like $22 to $24 a kilo. It's just insane. A box of Kraft dinner. Now, I'll admit here that I actually eat that stuff on occasion. I know you're not supposed to. I know it's bad, but it's my little guilty, lazy man's pleasure. And I keep a few boxes literally hidden in the back of the cupboard where nobody will see them because it's embarrassing. But anyway, point of that is to say, I used to buy those things for 50 cents a box at Food Basics when they put 12 of them on sale. In a box of 12. Now you're looking at $1.50 to $1.75 for a box of regular Kraft dinner. This is poor people food. You know, this is what we ate when we were kids because we were poor. You know, but it's like, wow, a box of Kraft dinner has gone up, 300%. It's just unreal. So I do think that Mr. Trudeau has been successful in drawing the life out of the middle class. It's more indebted. It's got more HELOCs, it's got more lines of credit, it's got higher credit card debt. And increasingly, the middle class is going to have to start depending on $10 daycare and free handouts and canceling student loans and all that stuff. So yeah, that's kind of where I think we're going into this fall. And we'll see. It's curious. A lot of people think the Liberals either call an election now and take a chance on winning it, or if they don't, they wind up losing their government midway through the year next year when Jagmeet Singh walks out on them eventually. And then the Conservatives win and the Liberals will be in they'll be out in the weeds somewhere for the next 5 to 10 years. So interesting times, Jeff.
As usual, the fun never stops. And it's just like Friedrich Hayek said, the road to serfdom is paved with social democracy, because this is exactly what happens. And he said that the generation who first benefits from the redistributionist policies would eventually grow to be economically dominant in their elderhood. And that is something that we're seeing with this pandemic, is the greatest intergenerational transfer of wealth from the predominantly Gen X or millennial-owned small business sector to the corporate-owned Costco's and Walmarts, and funding the investment classes, hedge funds, pension funds that then go out and scoop up all the residential property and turn all the millennials and Gen Z into a permanent renting class. And now they're going to have them begging for food in the bread lines, apparently. And another thing I want to talk about, because you mentioned identity politics when you started that. You were talking about them going after Pierre Poilievre and talking about how he's racist and probably using a lot of those tactics. It seems like some of the shine is starting to come off of that now. It's my understanding. I read a book called Political Tribes one time by Yale professor Amy Chua, and she makes a pretty good case that politics all over the world is pretty damn tribal. And in places like Venezuela, they end up going from being an oil-rich, prosperous, free country to the hellscape that it is now, where they're shooting their dogs for food, by pressing on those seams in the cultural mosaic. Hugo Chavez, I think, is ethnically both African and indigenous. That's a pretty large swath of the population. They're either African, indigenous, or some combination of the two, and as in Amero-Indian. And he would talk about that. He would say, my lips are black, my lips are African, and my face is I can't remember which tribe it is now, but he would invoke those identities. When he was pointing to things like, the white establishment and how they tended to dominate the beauty contests, and a great deal of the wealth was concentrated within that class and that ethnicity, and so people would rally to his side because he was the savior combating, the racist hegemony, apparently. So it seems to kind of play on the human penchant for envy and for otherization of the outsider. It has been very successful elsewhere. I think it probably smacks of something like Chinese communism, because they're ethnostatist and they're ethnically homogenous. They don't really they don't really have the same vulnerabilities that we do, and they recognize and exploit those. Yeah, I mean, it could be successful, but what would you say are some good counter narrative points that might kind of stop this kind of demagoguery in its tracks?
Yeah. Again, to fall back on the thing, if I was advising the Liberal government, one more thing I would say is have the election now, because your tricks are running out. So, for instance, the first few years that Prime Minister Trudeau was in power, all he had to do was sort of yell racist, misogynist, Islamophobic, and that would sort of silence a lot of the opposition. And now I think we're seeing people get to the point, and I think the convoy was kind of the turning point in this, is that he yells and screams at them, calls them all the bad names, exercises his politics of identity, exercises the politics of division. And now people are actually sort of reacting and walking away from it, saying, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to ignore you on this. I think the convoy was the tipping point. The James Top March was another thing that, as soon as the Conservative candidate came out and marched with James Top, he was immediately branded as a white racist and a nationalist and a right-wing extremist. And I think in his case, Pierre Poilievre is looking at this saying, people are just tired of hearing that, and they don't actually believe it that much anymore. There's that 20% of voters who are hardcore Liberal who will continue to believe it no matter what. But I think a lot of other Canadians are just giving up on it and saying it's nonsense. And in fact, it's backfiring. Now, just for fun, this past weekend, we had a series of protests right across the country with the folks coming out in support of the Dutch farmers, etc. And within V4F, we didn't really play a role in that. We didn't organize it. We didn't, sort of advertise it, that kind of thing. But I did ask a lot of folks in V4F to go to the protest and keep an eye open and tell me, what do you see? And I asked two questions. What do you see age-wise, like 0 to 25, 25 to 40, 40 and up? And what do you see wealth-wise, like lower class, middle class, or upper class kind of wealth? And it was quite fascinating. I got different responses back from different parts of the country, whether they were rural, whether they were urban, whether they were like suburbs outside of Montreal or suburbs outside of Edmonton, got different answers. But one thing is really clear is the support for the Dutch farmers goes across lower, middle, and upper class. So I asked folks to look at vehicles and send me pictures of vehicles. And you got, a bunch of folks show up in a 2002 Honda Civic beater with, the fenders half rusted off or whatever. But you had people showing up with Mercs, BMWs, X-Drive BMWs, 5 Series, this kind of stuff. These are like $80,000, $100,000 vehicles. You got a lot of people showing up with Ford F-250s, and these things are $80,000 and $90,000 a pop. These are people who actually are prosperous, they're entrepreneurial and whatever. So we saw a good range of people coming up to support this protest, which is good. And I think the higher end folks, like the BMWs, the Audis, the Mercs, and the Ford F-250s with all the shiny stuff, not the working ones, but the shiny ones. That's the entrepreneurial class. And I think they're looking around going, things are not good in Canada. And if Trudeau goes after the middle class to draw the wealth down, that's the entrepreneurial class. That's their money going out the window. That's their future going out the window. Now, the other thing that was fun and it was interesting to me, and this is a message to the Liberal Party, I think, and probably a message to the Conservative Party as well, is some of the crowds are disproportionately younger. I would have thought with the convoy and with these kind of crowds, you'd see sort of an older crowd like 45, 50 and up or whatever. And yet there were people out there that fit that category. But there was a lot of people who are like, 20 to 30 kind of thing, 20, 25 in there. And I think that's your sort of Gen Zs, your lower end millennials or whatever. And I think they look at their future and go, their future seems to be an unpaid student loan, a crappy apartment, and a bus pass.
Live in the pod, eat the bugs.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, the government's telling them a couple of years from now, you should be eating bugs. And it's kind of like
farm in Ontario.
Yeah, it's like, wow. I mean, the government, yeah, you're right. The government is spending money on a cricket production factory here in Ontario. I'm not quite sure where that's all going. But if you're a Gen Z person who's 22, 24 years old, you want to work hard, you're a smart kid, you're ambitious, you're willing to put in the hours, and you're willing to, hurt your fingers with a bit of hard work. Man, it's increasingly depressing to be that age. And I'm sitting here at a certain age, and I go, a lot of people say, well, it'd be so much better to be young now. And I look at it and go, hell no. As someone who was born when I was born, I think we had more opportunities with less pain and confusion then than we do now. I wouldn't want to be 18, 20 years old now. It's like, oh my God, you're getting into a world that's a complete mess. You're going to have to be super, super good to even try and get ahead. Whereas when my generation came up, all you had to do is show up and be willing to work hard, and you could eke out a middle-class existence. If you actually wanted to work smart and work overtime and have a side gig, you could do really well. But now I think it's bad. So my message, I guess, the moral of the story here is there is a lot of younger people who are becoming politicized, which you wouldn't have seen 5 or 10 years ago. Normally, they're too busy out drinking, going to clubs, and having fun. And now young people are getting politicized, going, hey, how come my future is screwed? Like, why am I in such a mess? So the message to the governments here is, or to the parties is, you better get out there and start working on the 20 to 25-year-olds because they're becoming political. They're thinking, and oh yeah, by the way, they're not happy with the status quo.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was really encouraged by when I was in Ottawa, actually, was just how many young people were coming out. And, when they're expressing their appreciation for my service and stuff like that, it felt so genuine. So I was sort of really taken aback by just how young the demographics seem to be. So I'm always encouraged by that. And of course, I'm going to plug for the usual theory that I do, which is the fourth turning. And fourth turning is always a crisis era that lasts for a generation. Ours started with the 2008 collapse and culminates in a great crisis that we're in right now. Last one was the 29 collapse, culminated in the great crisis of the Second World War. And the thing is that if you look at the demographics of, say, the People's Party of Canada, you'll see the same thing. You'll see that it's all kind of the younger generations. Kind of, you can't leave us with this legacy because it's effectively serfdom. I mean, they're born into debt due to all this excessive spending, and that's effectively debt serfdom. And what opportunities do they have left now? So. And it's interesting too, because you talk about the differences in the outlooks between these different demographics, and you can really see it in the music. For example, like what we think of as classic rock is basically the boomer generation's rock, and what we think of as alternative Seattle sound, gangsta rap, even is the Gen X generation of music. And Gen X had CDs, and we loved our CDs. It was the best sound that was available up to that time. And when the boomers were going around with their 8-tracks, they loved those, and later cassette tapes. And now the millennials have their MP3s, and it just keeps getting better and better in terms of the fidelity and the quality of the equipment and whatnot. But the outlook continues to kind of depreciate. Like it's getting more and more bleak. You hear it in the song lyrics where these trends have continued downward in terms of the social mood, at least. And I think that has everything to do with the kind of future that people are looking forward to. And what you'll see is that the millennials are the civic-minded generation, right? They're the hero archetype, same as the GI generation that won the Second World War. So they're they're very interested in public policy. They're always kind of coming out looking to serve. Some of them get swept up into the wrong side, and we end up with witch hunts. But the ones who end up on the right side of history, you end up with the hero generation, like that of the greatest generation, the GI generation that won the Second World War. So it's really interesting to hear it coming together in that way. And the next stage in this theory is basically that there's a great coming together and around a desire to surmount these challenges that we've let waste for too long. So what do you see as being kind of the way out of this? Like if there's a way for the younger generations to kind of take back their voice in our country and have something like a future for them and their kids, then what is something like the peaceful political resolution to this, you think?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, if you kind of wake up in the morning now and look around the world, it's difficult not to be a bit pessimistic because there's just so many things going wrong. Putin just announced this morning he's turning off another turbine in the gas pipeline. So Germany's facing, a cold winter if they don't get things straightened out. Massive debts, seventh wave, Omicron, and all this stuff. But I think there are points out there of light which you can look forward to. One is, I think people are getting so incredibly frustrated with incompetent government, with continuing debt, with no future, that they're going to become more politically engaged. And the message is going to be, hey there, government, I'm not really all that keen on how many transgendered washrooms you have at my local minor hockey league, but I would like the road fixed and I would like the airport open. In other words, folks are going to demand that government go back to governing rather than social engineering. And if we get into another great recession, which I believe and many people would say we're actually in it right now. We're just at the start of it. We're in the first quarter of negative growth. The next quarter will probably negative growth. So technically it's a recession. And then it's going to go downhill from there. As people get cold and hungry, they tend to get cranky and they look at government and they go, get this fixed, get off your butt. And, I don't really care about how many climate credits I get for eating crickets. What I want is heat in my house. So I think that's kind of a bit of good news. The other thing is people I think they've lost faith in institutions, which is bad in a certain way, but it's good if you look at it another way. So right now, the government has co-opted most of the institutions of civil society. The Canadian press is owned by the government. The RCMP has essentially become the political wing of, or it's become the enforcement arm of PMO. The military, let's not even go there. Elections Canada is using its power to go around and beat up an independent media rather than running effective elections, which they didn't last time. Mm-hmm. So I think the institutions of civil society are crumbling as well. And people are going to get angry with that when they realize, yeah, your hospital emergency room is closed again this weekend because we fired all the staff. Mm-hmm. So I think there's going to be sort of a reckoning and there's going to be a real, wouldn't say necessarily violent push, but the potential for civil violence is very high in Europe, certainly in America, and increasingly so here in Canada. Now, everybody's on about the boomers, this, that, one thing. The boomers are going to leave one thing behind them, and that is a whack of cash. The boomers are the single richest generation ever. And what is happening now is the boomers are starting to die off, and we're just getting to sort of the thin end of that. And what's going to happen is you've got a bunch of boomers out there that bought a house in 1965 and they paid $15,000 for it. They got it paid off in 15 years because that's what they did. And now that little house they bought in the suburb of Toronto that was worth $15K back in 1965 is now worth $1.5 million. When they kick off, and they will because, age does that to you, they're going to leave that house behind. And anything I've looked up says that well in excess of 90% of money when somebody dies goes to the family. Now, some people will leave it to the church. Some people will leave it to the local dog shelter or something. But the generation behind the boomers are going to be the recipients of a ton of cash or a ton of real property. So you may only get a couple of $1,000 from your parents when they kick off because they spent all their money on taxes or whatever, but they're going to leave you a $1.5 million home in Toronto. Same thing goes for other areas of the country. A house that sold for $20,000 or $30,000 in Moncton, New Brunswick is now selling for $300,000 to $400,000. So when those people die off, there's going to be a crap load of money. So if we go through another recession and if people demand effective government that is actually capable of doing things, once we get through that kind of initial phase, that initial struggle, there is going to be a huge generational handoff of wealth. And hopefully, there's going to be a few people that are going to sell the house, buy a Lamborghini, wreck it, and then they're poor again. But there will be a bunch of millennials and Gen Zs are going to take their parents' house and either subdivide it and rent part of it, or they'll sell it for the cash and buy something else. But there is like a ton of money sitting there, which is going to do a generational transfer in the next, 10, 12, 15 years kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess I'll try to throw in a cynical counterpoint to that. And, I trash the boomers quite frequently, as you know, and I'm not trashing you. It's always present company accepted for anybody who's not up on this conversation. You can use analogies from different stories about fourth turnings, like, for example, The Wizard of Oz. And what you see is that there are good characters and bad characters. The boomers follow what's called the prophet archetype, the prophet generational archetype, because they're the ones who found our religions. And this saculum, which is a great year, it was postmodernism during the spiritual awakening that took place during the 70s ish. So now this is the stage where they're the elder prophet that ushers in the new theocracy. And there's a lot of demands for fealty and whatnot to this regime. So that's kind of the situation. And in The Wizard of Oz, where we see that everything's kind of falling apart and things are going to chaos, a lot of parallels there. We have on one side we have the witches who are cannibalistic, if I recall correctly, and they're going after the kids. And on the other side, we have the Wizard of Oz, who's actually, the good guy in the whole story, who ends up helping everybody. And so if this is my fourth turning story, my Wizard of Oz, then that's Tom. He's the Wizard of Oz character in my fourth turning. And Eddie Cornell, he's Obi-Wan Kenobi, the fourth turning that's represented in Star Wars. So if you want to maybe take that social lens and kind of go back and look at those generational archetypes of prophet, nomad, hero, and artist, that's Boomer, Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z, respectively. That's what you'll see. That's the order of generational archetypes that always results in a major crisis known as a fourth turning. I'll have to do a full video on that at some point. I just kind of like to throw those key points in there. So Tom, what do you think? Are we looking at the real deal here? Like, it could be there's plenty of motivation, I guess, to go into a fall election. There's a vulnerability they could exploit with the Conservatives being leaderless, and there's also a lot of corruption that they need to cover up that seems to be, kind of coming to light very soon. So, what do you see? What do you think? Are they really going to go for this?
Well, hard to say. I mean, it's sort of an indicators and warnings issue. Start watching now to see what points can be observed, what data points can be put together to say whether they're going to move in that direction. So I would argue they're already laying down the groundwork. Trudeau's already out campaigning a summer-style campaign. He's already laying down the groundwork with the media, with the RCMP, etc. He's already laid down with the groundwork with the members of parliament who've been effectively silenced in all of the parties. So all those kind of things are in process. So the sort of external factors to watch that aren't necessarily under Trudeau's control are the global economy, of which we are, of course, a key part. A global collapse could hurt us very badly because we're already in very bad shape. So watch the global economy, watch the global stock markets. If they start to plunge quickly in August, then that argues for an election sooner rather than later. Also watch the war in Ukraine, and not so much Ukraine itself, but we're in a situation now with Ukraine. The war comes down to basically one thing. The question is, can President Putin and Russia continue to bleed longer than the Europeans can remain solvent? In other words, if the Russians can keep pushing on the ground and make gains, however modest, it continues to push the Europeans economically into a very bad situation. So if this war somehow gets settled in August, if there's some peace talks underway and they quit bombing Odessa and, some signals get made that things are getting a little better, then that sort of pushes the election a little further back. But if the war is still a hot war by late August going into early September, that sort of argues in favor of Trudeau moving ahead with an election, having it sooner rather than later. So anyway, there's a bunch of things to watch like that. But the bottom line of all of this is the economy. If the economy, which is at the moment sinking, there, I don't think anybody is sort of effectively arguing, other than President Biden, that the economy is doing well. Then that's an indicator. And the greater the drops in the economy through the month of August and early September, the greater the potential for Mr. Trudeau to call an election. Now, other people have sort of said, well, he can't call election. The prime minister just can't wake up in the morning and call an election. And then he's got this coalition partner. And to be quite blunt and to be quite brutal, and I've had a couple of people sort of make that point to me, bottom line is, if Trudeau wants to engineer an election, he will. It's very simple. All he has to do is just so greatly upset Jagmeet Singh that he walks away from the coalition, which he could do very easily. He could just expose Jagmeet Singh's background and history that they know about the guy, expose it publicly, and that would be the end of his political career, and Jagmeet Singh would have to walk away from the Liberal coalition. Trudeau could also engineer a financial bill in Parliament, which is just so outrageous even the NDP won't vote for it. And any financial vote in the House of Commons is considered a test, and if they fail, that's the end of the Parliament. So there we go. And the other thing, it's within the power of the Prime Minister to just go to the Governor General and say, yeah, I think there's a big crisis coming up. I think we're going to have a lot of problems in the future. We need a new, firm majority government to handle the crisis. So I want you to call an election. And given the sort of recent histories of governors general in this country, I don't see anybody sort of standing up and opposing that. So bottom line, if Trudeau wants an election, he'll get it. If he doesn't want it, it won't happen.
Yeah, and the Governor General is one of his appointees, and she's the only Governor General we've ever had that didn't speak French, if I recall correctly. So, she's pretty clearly part of the machine, the Trudeau machine, and I think that she's probably going to do his bidding. And that is the whole modus operandi with these narcissists is, they just kind of do whatever they want and then make up some BS to justify it. When Trudeau, when it came to light that Trudeau had groped Rose Knight, for example, at that beer festival in BC, it was basically society's fault, and the rest of us were the ones who needed to take a lesson from it. And I think he really believes that. I think he really thinks that way. He's got a kind of smugness about him, superiority and self-righteousness. It makes him very dangerous as a leader. And I think you're probably right that if he sees his power threatened, then he's probably going to make a move. I'm not too sure if he's going to go ahead.
I was just going to say there's one other wild card out there that's kind of fun right now, okay. And people are watching it. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, is, on his way to being the ex-Prime Minister of the United Kingdom because his own party revolted on him. Mario Draghi, the leader of Italy, resigned once, didn't work, and it looks like he just resigned again. He's gone. Angela Merkel recently left in Germany. President Macron of France is still in power, but with a greatly weakened position because he failed to gain any kind of a foothold in Parliament. So he's now got kind of I wouldn't just say it's a hung government, but it certainly isn't dynamic or powerful. And people are kind of looking around going, yeah, and watch this fall in November. The Democrats most probably are going to take a thumping in the lower house, in the Congress. And they're going to take a bit of a thumping in the Senate as well, probably. So there's kind of a sense, there's kind of a wave in the West right now where a whole lot of people are looking around looking at their leader and going, you know what? Tired of that guy. Get him out of there. So this is another thing that I think Trudeau in a minority government is in a much weaker position when faced with that kind of pressure. He would much prefer a majority government, which I would argue, unfortunately, is not. It's not unreasonable to say he could get a minority government, or he could get a majority government, in an October election if he plays his cards right and the economy breaks in his favor.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, like you were mentioning, a lot of really good parallels in the geopolitical scene right now over in Europe. and you have basically Trudeau's analog over there in France, which is Macron. He's very progressive, very globalist. He's Mr. Globalism there. He's got all kinds of shine on him, really polished, and got all the right moves and the right looks. And the opposition that's been gaining traction over there is led by Marie Le Pen. And she's kind of analogous to something like the People's Party. So she's the one that they called racist and misogynist and Islamophobic and whatever, the usual basket of deplorables that they hurl at everybody ever since the 2016 election. So it seems that the people of France are kind of waking up, and they're becoming wise to this identity politics scam, and they're starting to get a little sick of it too. So again, it does kind of seem like, with everything that you just mentioned there, that the tide is kind of turning, and the harbingers are out there for like the pendulum to swing back the other way, I guess. So that's really encouraging. Thanks for that, Tom. I'll give you the last word here before we sign off. You got anything else for us today?
Oh, yeah, just one other thought on Macron. What was funny is he managed to win. I mean, they have a different electoral system where you sort of vote for the president over here, but you vote for the parliament over there. It's a separate kind of issue. Mm-hmm. So he was able to win the presidency with a reduced vote, but still, nonetheless, clear win. So, okay, he's president. That's fine. Prime minister. What am I saying here? Yeah. But what was really weird was he lost control of the parliament. And where the votes went, the votes kind of left the two main middle parties, and they kind of went both directions. They went over to the left and they went over to the right. So there's this rather bizarre situation in France where you've got Macron in the middle as the leader, but the hard left and the hard right were the people that gained in parliament. And now they're kind of looking at each other going, okay, how do we make this work with this guy in the middle? So it's an interesting thing to say that the people are expressing their frustration, and that's one way. The other wild card in this, of course, is the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. This guy is a carbon copy of Trudeau. He's World Economic Forum. He's anti-fossil fuel. He is pro-gun grab. He is he's the guy that's, banning fertilizer for Dutch farmers, even though they're like the most efficient farmers in the world. And the Dutch, of course, have had this kind of low-grade, long-running Dutch farmers protest, and it's not really clear where that's going. We could see the Dutch Prime Minister getting the boot sometime later this year if that doesn't straighten itself out. So there's another little indicator and warning. If I was advising Trudeau, I'd say, dude, go fast, go hard, or face another 5 to 10 years in the wilderness if you don't do something quick.
Yeah, the pressure is definitely on at this point, I think. So we can expect to see things continue to get worse, I think, before they get better. But the good news is that more people are waking up to just how bad things are and how much worse the outlook is. So Tom, thanks a lot for all the great analysis from the intelligence side of the house, as always. I really appreciate it. And I guess, since the fourth turning is an American theory based on American politics, and you mentioned the American election, I'll throw in there that the most optimistic estimate for the end to the crisis is 2026, and they do have a presidential election scheduled for that one. So maybe another podcast sometime on what's going down in the United States right now in terms of the House changing hands and potentially the presidency. I would say pretty much definitely the presidency at this point going into 2026. Could be looking at a Trump-DeSantis ticket. I think that would be the ideal solution, with DeSantis running domestic and Trump running foreign. And when Trump ages out, you got a left seat, right seat to do there with DeSantis, and he'll bring somebody else on for the vice presidency. So that's my most optimistic outlook for the moment. And Tom, I appreciate your words of optimism as well. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Bye.